Ever get that feel? You know that feeling when you have a killer idea at work,
Uh-huh.
but something holds you back?
Yeah.
Or maybe you've seen it, some teams just hum with energy, others just sort of
It's
exist.
that invisible force.
What is that?
Fear, really. Even when we don't always see it, it's there in the workplace.
Well, today we're tackling that fear head on.
Oh, wow.
Our deep dive is all about building what Amy Edmondson calls the fearless organization. We've got research, articles, the whole shebang ready to break it all down.
Yeah,
So it's not just about feeling safe at work, though that's part of it.
right. It's more than that.
Edmondson's work digs into the hidden costs of staying silent, how psychological safety really impacts a company, from the day-to-day problem solving to, the bottom line.
Yeah. And it's all connected.
Let's break it down. What is psychological safety? How does Edmondson define it?
She talks about it as a shared belief that it's safe to take risks, interpersonal risks, within a team or an organization, right? So it's that feeling of I can speak up. I can say what I think without being punished, without being humiliated.
It sounds so simple.
It does, doesn't it?
But we know it's not always the case.
Right, right. And that's where things get interesting.
Yeah, and actually, speaking of not always being the case, there's that story, the NICU nurse, Christina.
Right, right. Christina's story.
She saw a medication error, a potentially life-threatening one, but she hesitated to correct a senior colleague.
That's the thing, isn't it? We all have that, like, unconscious calculator in our minds, and it's like weighing the risk of speaking up.
Oh, totally. Like, is this the hill I want to die on?
Exactly, exactly. And in that moment, it felt too risky for her.
And it's the NICU we're talking about.
High stakes.
Yeah. So imagine the weight of staying silent in that kind of environment. And this isn't just like an anecdote, right?
Oh, no, not at all.
Edmondson has hard data to back this up.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Studies show psychological safety is linked to fewer medical errors, less mistakes all around, really, more innovation.
And
Get this, even bigger profits.
music to any CEO's ears, I'm sure.
Absolutely, right.
But it's not just about the upside either, right?
Oh,
It's
yeah.
about avoiding the huge mistakes, the
Yeah.
disasters. Volkswagen, the Dieselgate scandal, that's a prime example.
A classic case, really, of what happens when fear takes over a company culture.
Right.
It's almost like a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
Just imagine being that engineer at Volkswagen. You know something's wrong, something big, but you're too afraid to speak.
Right. To rock the boat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That pressure to conform, to not be the one to say something, it can be crippling.
And it can lead to disaster.
It can, absolutely.
Yeah.
And, it's not just about preventing those big disasters.
Right.
It's also about not missing those golden opportunities.
Right. The ones that could make or break a company.
Think about Nokia.
Oh, right.
Once upon a time, they were like the kings of the mobile phone world.
They were.
And then, boom, the smartphone revolution hit.
Right.
And they totally missed the boat.
Yeah.
Their culture was so afraid of change, so resistant. They were basically blindsided.
Wow. It's amazing how fear can take down even the giants.
Right.
So how do we cultivate this elusive psychological safety? Where do we even start?
Well, according to Edmondson, it starts at the top.
Okay. Leadership.
Leadership sets the tone.
Okay.
A great example, and it might sound a little counterintuitive, but
Okay.
Eileen Fisher, the fashion icon, she built her empire on what she calls managing by not knowing.
Managing by not knowing. Most leaders are taught the opposite.
I know, right?
So what's she doing differently?
She actually encourages her team. She invites them to share their ideas, to challenge her, even if it means she doesn't have all the answers.
Interesting. So it's less about always being right and more about creating that space for learning and collaboration.
Exactly. It's about being open to being wrong, to making mistakes, and learning from them.
That's such a different picture of leadership than what we usually see.
I know, right?
But it clearly works for her.
It does. And, it's not just about being nice or creating a feel-good atmosphere.
Okay.
There's a business case to be made here.
Yeah.
Look at Barry Wemler. They're in manufacturing, not exactly known for being, touchy-feely,
No, not really.
but they've had huge success prioritizing employee well-being, psychological safety, all of that.
What's their secret then? How are they doing it?
It starts with their CEO, Bob Chapman. He believes that people do their best work when they feel valued, respected, heard.
Okay.
It's more than just a belief, though. It's woven into everything they do, the entire company culture.
And the results.
They're seeing higher productivity, lower turnover, and a stronger bottom line.
Hmm.
It's not just about avoiding bad PR. It's about real, tangible results.
So how do we get there? How do we actually create a fearless organization?
Well, it's not magic, but it does take work. Edmondson provides a whole toolkit for leaders.
Okay.
One of the most powerful tools, framing the work.
Framing the work. What does that even mean?
It's all about how leaders set the stage, right from the get-go. Imagine a leader who's always emphasizing perfection, where mistakes are punished.
Oof, I wouldn't want to work there.
Right. People would be terrified to make a move.
Walking on eggshells, for sure.
Exactly. But what if, instead, that same leader framed the work as a learning process? Mistakes are expected, even encouraged, as long as we learn from them.
So instead of trying to avoid failure at all costs, it's more like failure is just part of the process as long as we learn.
Exactly. It's like Edmondson talks about a jazz band, right?
Okay.
That magic, the improvisation, it only happens because the musicians, they feel that safety to try new things. They can hit a wrong note. It's not going to derail the whole thing.
It's about creating that culture of experimentation, where failure is like a stepping stone, not a dead end.
Right, exactly. And that leads to another tool Edmondson talks about,
Oh,
proactive inquiry.
proactive inquiry.
Yeah, it's not just about saying you value different perspectives.
Uh-huh.
You got to actively look for them.
Yeah. So what would that look like in a meeting? For example, like instead of coming in with all the answers,
Oh, totally.
a leader would be like, what?
Hey, what are your thoughts on this?
Okay.
What haven't we thought about? Like actually wanting to know.
So it's really about shifting from like, I know this to I want to know more.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it makes people feel like, okay, my opinion matters here. Like at Google X.
Google's moonshot factory.
Yeah. They actually encourage something called intelligent failure.
Intelligent failure. I mean, I get it, but how is failure ever intelligent?
It sounds weird, but it works for them.
Yeah.
They've created this culture where, like, people are encouraged to take risks. And it's okay if it doesn't work out.
Okay, but how do they decide like what's a good failure versus one that maybe could have been avoided?
Well, Edmondson, she actually breaks it down into 3 different types.
Okay.
You got your preventable failures.
The ones that are just like someone wasn't paying attention.
Yeah, basically negligence, not following the rules, those ones we want to avoid.
Right. That makes sense. You can usually fix those with better training, clearer instructions, all that.
Exactly. Then you've got your complex failures. These happen in those, like, really unpredictable situations.
Like what? Give me an example.
Think, like, an operating room,
Okay. High stakes.
a nuclear power plant, even launching a new product, right? You can plan and plan, but
Something could always go wrong.
exactly. It's not about pointing fingers. It's about knowing that in those environments, the risk is just inherently there.
Okay, I see. So those are 2. What's the third?
The intelligent failures. These come from, like, actually trying something new, pushing boundaries. It's not about the outcome. It's about what you'll learn.
So it's like Thomas Edison said, I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work.
Yes, that's the idea. And Edmondson argues, she says, we need to make it okay to have those intelligent failures. Actually, more than okay, we should celebrate them.
So it's really about changing how we think about failure altogether. Like it's not a bad thing. It's just part of the process.
Right, it's essential for innovation.
Yeah.
But how do you create that shift,
Right. How do you get people to embrace failure?
It starts with leadership, right? Leaders have to walk the walk. They have to say, hey, intelligent failures are good, and actually mean it. And when they make a mistake, own it.
So leading by example, being vulnerable themselves, that makes a difference.
Huge difference.
Yeah.
And it's not just about talking the talk. You got to have systems in place
What kind of system?
to actually learn from those moments,
Yeah.
both the good and the bad. Group Danone, they do this really well. They have these things called knowledge marketplaces where employees from all over, they can connect, share what's working, what's not, lessons learned.
It's like crowdsourcing, but for knowledge.
Exactly. Everyone benefits. The whole organization learns and grows.
But what about those everyday moments, right? When someone speaks up, maybe with a different viewpoint or even bad news, how can leaders respond in a way that, doesn't shut it down, that keeps that psychological safety intact?
That's the real challenge, right? It's one thing to get people to speak up, but how do you make sure they don't regret it later?
Because one bad reaction can totally undo all the good work.
Oh, absolutely. And we'll get into how to do that right after this.
So how do leaders respond in a way that, keeps that door open, that encourages people to keep sharing?
It's a dance, right? You want to acknowledge the courage it takes to speak up, even if you don't necessarily agree with what they're saying.
Right, because it's not always about the message itself, but that they felt safe enough to share it in the first place.
Exactly. And that's where those nonverbal cues come in, too. A leader who's rolling their eyes or crossing their arms, they might as well be putting a big closed for business sign on the door.
Yeah, actions speak louder than words, right?
Totally. You can have all the open door policies in the world, but if your body language is saying don't even think about it, well, people are going to pick up on that.
And that trust, that psychological safety, it's gone.
Gone. So it's about creating a space where vulnerability isn't punished. Edmondson talks about Dr. Julie Morath. She was a pediatric surgeon.
Okay.
She really transformed the safety culture at this children's hospital, but she faced a lot of resistance at first.
Yeah, hospitals, especially surgery, they can be pretty hierarchical.
Oh, absolutely. The pecking order is clear.
So how'd she do it? How'd she break through?
By changing her language, instead of lecturing about protocols being all serious,
Uh-huh.
she started asking this simple question. Was everything as safe as you would like it to have been this week with your patients?
Interesting. So it's not about blame. It's more like a shared goal.
Right. We all want things to be safe. And it just opens up that conversation in a way that doesn't put people on the defensive.
It makes me think about, even on a smaller scale, when maybe a project I'm leading is going off track.
Yeah.
It's easy to fall into that trap of, like, who messed up? Who do we blame?
It's tempting for sure.
But what if instead it was more like, okay, how can we learn from this? Or what can we do better next time?
Subtle shift. Big difference.
Right. It changes the whole tone of the conversation.
Absolutely. It's about focusing on solutions, not blame.
There's another story, too, from the research about Cynthia Carroll, first female CEO of Anglo American.
Oh, wow. The mining company.
Yeah, and mining, not exactly known for being, warm and fuzzy.
Oh, really? That's a tough industry. Lots of risks.
Exactly. And she knew that to improve safety, it had to start with the culture. She couldn't just dictate new rules.
People had to buy in. They had to feel empowered to actually follow them.
Right. So she drew inspiration from this South African tradition called Lekgotla. It's all about finding consensus, respecting everyone's voice.
Interesting. So instead of top down, it's more inclusive?
Exactly. She held these big assemblies. Everyone, all levels, could share concerns, ideas.
Everyone had a seat at the table.
Right. It broke down those hierarchies, created this sense of we're all in this together.
That's powerful. But what about those situations where, maybe the damage is already done? Like a culture of fear has really taken hold. Can you turn that around?
That's a good question and probably a tough one to answer.
It's definitely harder, right? But not impossible. Sometimes it takes that one brave voice to break the silence.
It's like that saying, it takes a village.
Right. And when someone does speak up, that's when it's crucial to have their back. Think about Susan Fowler. She's the one who blew the whistle on Uber.
Right. Her story really exposed a lot of problems.
It did, and it shows how important it is to have safe ways for people to report these issues, misconduct, harassment.
And to know that they won't be punished for speaking up.
Exactly, because otherwise, why would anyone say anything? They'll just suffer in silence, and the problems will fester. And it's not just about those really extreme cases either,
Right, not just the big scandals.
It's about feeling comfortable raising any concern, whether it's an ethical issue, a potential risk to the company, anything.
So it's like a collective responsibility, everyone looking out for each other.
Exactly. And that goes from the top to the bottom, all levels.
Wow, this has been such an eye-opening conversation. It's clear that psychological safety, it's not just a nice to have.
It's essential, really, if you want to create a workplace where people can thrive.
And if you want your organization to reach its full potential.
Absolutely. It's about harnessing all that talent, all those ideas, by creating an environment where people feel safe to share them.
So as you go about your day-to-day, think about, what resonated with you. What's one small step you can take, maybe in your own workplace, to create more of that psychological safety?
Because even small changes, over time, they can make a big difference.
It's about taking that first step and then another and another.
Creating that ripple effect.
And who knows, maybe it'll turn into a wave. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious and keep asking questions.